Welcome to Spy Girls, where espionage meets real talk. We are two former CIA operatives. My name is Brittany Butler, and this is Tracy Walder, a former FBI special agent. We pull back the curtain on the world of intelligence, crime, and global affairs. We're so happy you're here to join us.
Well, I'm
Okay, so thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to be talking today about our scariest moments at the CIA. And I would love, Tracy, if you don't mind kicking us off, telling us all about that scariest moment that you had.
sure. Brittany, it's really hard to like narrow it down to one, right? I think
Right.
that
Yeah.
was like the most difficult task
Yeah.
probably about all of this. But here's something I want to say. I do get asked that question, right? Like, how often was I scared? But what I want folks to remember is I was 21 when I EOD'd or entered on duty, right? I was
Mhm.
21.
Yeah.
And I think like when you're 21 versus now I'm almost 47,
Mhm.
your version of what is scary is very different, right? Than when
Right.
you're 21, fresh out of the sorority house in college, right?
Yeah.
And then you are now 46, 47, a mom, right? Like all the things. So
Hmm.
it's very interesting to reflect back on that because I'm not sure I remembered being scared like in the moment, if that
Right.
makes any sense, because I
Right.
think our version of immortality is super different
Yes.
when we're young
Yeah.
versus middle aged, I guess is what I am now. So
Yeah.
I think that
Well, I
that's
think
like,
it's naive in a way. Like, I don't know if you agree with it, but like,
yeah,
I totally think that they want people that are younger, because you're a little less life experience. You have less to lose in a way. Like, once you
100%.
become a mom, it's like your focus
Everything's different.
becomes your kids and your family and everything. And so you look at the world so differently. Whereas, like, in your 20s, you're just like, I got this. Let's go. Let's go get some bad guys. And
You're
it's not
totally
that way
right.
in your 40s.
No, I think you're so right. I couldn't agree with you more because it's just how we evolve and mature,
Yes.
quite frankly. And so maybe it was good I did that so
Yeah.
young. I don't know. But
Yeah.
I would say there's probably two like scary moments. I think the first was at headquarters, right? Being there on 9/11 and not knowing where the threat was next, because there
Mhm.
was a lot of discussion on it, are these other planes. The Pennsylvania plane, the one that hit in Shanksville, was actually still up in the air for quite some time after we had the planes hit the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. And so there were questions within CIA, right, and within CTC. Where is that plane going to hit? Is it coming for the Capitol? Is it coming for CIA headquarters? Where is that plane planning on hitting? And so I think obviously physically being there, and that clearly courageous crew and passengers who basically downed the plane themselves in Shanksville. Obviously, I'm so grateful to them and what they did and their bravery. They're heroes. There's no question. But
Sure.
obviously, that was scary because there was this unknown, right? Being just sitting there. Obviously, none of us really had been evacuated. By that point, I was never evacuated, but other offices, right? I think we're
Mhm.
still there. CIA was still fully staffed at that point in time. So I think that was obviously scary. But I think from a physical perspective, the
Mhm.
scariest moment for me was definitely in Afghanistan. I think that probably goes without saying. In a war zone, there are a lot of
Right.
things going
Yeah.
on at the time. And I would say the biggest one was actually a friendly fire incident. I don't want to say what the country was. It's probably not appropriate. It may still be classified. I honestly don't know.
Mhm.
But what had happened was this was early on in our war in Afghanistan. So this was just after September 11th when I was there. And at that point in time, Afghanistan only had really one paved road from Bagram to Kabul. I think people don't realize how underdeveloped
Mhm.
Afghanistan, because we see pictures of Iraq, which is more developed, to be honest.
Right.
And Afghanistan's, I mean, it's the wild, wild west, to be honest. And it was really interesting. We were just going on some missions at some guest houses to talk to some individuals. And for some reason that night, we actually typically didn't take the bulletproof Suburbans with us because obviously it drew a lot of attention to us. Nothing screams, "Hey, CIA is coming!"
Right.
Right? Than a bulletproof
Yeah.
Suburban.
Yeah. Here we go. We're
Yeah,
secret
but for
spies.
For some reason that night, and I really don't remember why, we had taken that Suburban. In Afghanistan, I never drove because women don't drive there, and so I was not driving. We had a security person who was driving. It was myself and another officer who were in there because we were going to go talk to someone. We had to pass a particular checkpoint that was being manned by a friendly country to us. They were helping us in the war on terror. And for some reason, I don't know why, they started firing on us. Um, fully started opening fire on us. And
Oh,
yes, and so obviously that was scary. I think people don't realize in bulletproof vehicles, obviously, bullets aren't going to go directly in, but they do obviously shoot out the tires. They do. There's ways that impacts you, and so we couldn't drive anymore because the tires, I would say three or four of them were gone flat. And so they stopped shooting because our driver was basically saying that we were Americans. But it was really disturbing, I think, to me, to think that we could be in a situation. Now, granted, it was pitch black, fully understand that. We did a lot of these things at night, which I think people can expect. And I do understand that. But I think for me, I was a little scared because at that point in time, you think the enemy at that time was Al Qaeda, the Taliban, right? Like that was the enemy that we
yeah.
were fighting, not this. I think we would consider them a Western country. And I think to be misidentified that
Mhm.
quickly and to have them open fire that quickly, we
Mm,
didn't even show any kind of ID at the checkpoint, was really crazy to me. And what I started to think about was that, I can't really control other people and how they're going to react in very dangerous situations. I
right.
assumed everyone acted like us because at the farm, we had training in that in our defensive driving courses. And so it was very eye-opening to me. Let me just put it that way.
Okay, so I have to ask, so you touched on like the defensive driving courses, and
Yeah.
I remember very distinctly. So, at whenever you go overseas, it used to be a requirement. I don't know if it still is, probably is to some extent. You have to take this defensive driving course, and a lot of it is get off the X, right? So, like anytime there's like a threat that comes to you, it's just like plow through it. So if you're at a checkpoint, they're shooting at you,
Let's go.
plow through
Keep
it.
going.
So is that what they did? Do they just
Yeah.
keep or the
No.
tires were
And
shot
I think
out? Okay.
no, and that's what was like so surprising to me. So
Okay.
when I took the defensive driving course, and it was, listen, we are doing these things at the farm to learn, right? They
Right.
are teaching us. So people are going to do things wrong
Right.
initially, right? Because you have to learn. And I do remember being super proud of myself, to my
Yeah.
own horn. I did well in defensive driving. And I remember being at a checkpoint, I'll use air
Yeah.
quotes, right? And I had the instructor in the car with
Yeah.
me. And I was the only one in my class that plowed through it. I broke the
Yeah.
barrier. Everyone else
Barrier. Yeah.
was like rolling down the window. Some
Yeah.
people were taught, but again, they're learning, right? So it's a process of learning, and that's okay.
Sure.
By the end of it, no one was doing that, and that's good.
Yeah.
Like we were out in the field, and this dude just stopped the car. Why are we stopping?
Why are we stopping? Yeah,
When I talked to him
interesting.
later, oh
I
sorry,
was just gonna say, like what you're trained to do and like what you actually probably do,
two different things.
like two different things. Like if you're being shot at, like, I mean, I don't know if I'd be really calm and like line my sights and like, take a breath. Like I think I would just be like really freaked out and just start shooting.
Well,
Which
I
is
think
yeah.
we were unfortunately the way that it worked in Afghanistan in certain situations, without giving too much information, is we actually were not allowed to. I was armed in certain times and not armed in other times. And so at that point in time, myself and the other person were actually not armed, just the
Mm,
driver of the vehicle.
okay.
I think probably that changed later. We would leave them locked. Just when we met with certain people, that was just what we did. I'm not saying that's right, but
Yeah.
that's something we did. And when I talked to the driver, because I'm not gonna lie, I was a little pissed that he
Yeah.
didn't keep going. I'm
Keep
not gonna say
going.
I'm not always the nicest person. And he made a good point. At
Mhm.
that point in time, this is very early on. He's like, I didn't know if there were IEDs in front of me. And
Oh,
he's like,
okay.
I didn't know if it had been cleared. And I was like, well, at least you could have reversed because you didn't hit them on the way in,
Right, right,
right?
right, right.
But I get where he was
Yeah.
coming from.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's so interesting because I do think so. Tracy came into she was in the CIA before I came in, so we're kind of in two different like eras. I think of probably serving the counterterrorism mission in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I was in Iraq, and they issued us our weapons, and we had them for like the whole time. But this is kind of a funny story. So I have my bulletproof vest on. I've got my Glock. I've got my M4. I've got all this stuff, right? And I get off the plane. I've flown into Baghdad initially, but my assignment was in Erbil, which is the northern part of the country, for those who are not familiar. And at this time, Erbil was pretty peaceful. Like it wasn't like a super scary place to be. I mean, I'm still in the war zone, but it wasn't like Baghdad at that time. This is like 2006, 2007. And so I get off the cargo plane, and I'm like fully suited up with all my weapons, and the
Look at
GRS,
my GI Joe.
like GI Jane,
Yeah,
and the GRS guys, which are like they're like kind of our
right.
protective service in the CIA when we go on these assignments. They were like, "What are you doing? Like, why are you dressed like that? Like, you have all this get up on." I guess it just like wasn't a dangerous place like enough where I needed to have all these weapons on me at all.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I think they were playing with me, but they were just like, Brittany, if it comes down to you or one of your other CIA operatives like having or officers like having to shoot your weapons, like we're dead. And I was like, oh my gosh, you guys must not have a lot of confidence in the CIA's training capabilities,
That's so
because it
mean.
was so mean. But I was like, but I think that's just an example of, some of the prejudices that at least I had to
100%. Yeah.
undergo. Like they saw my blonde hair, they saw, like, they're like, oh, you're not, you can't shoot that weapon very well. But what's ironic is like when I went to the farm, I went there without any kind of weapons training. I
Me
did
too.
not grow around,
Me
I
too.
didn't
I
grow up
didn't grow
around
up around
firearms,
them.
none of
Yeah.
that. So I really listened to my instructors, and I really took what they were saying carefully. And by the end, I was better than like 90% of my class because I really listened to them, and I really I took to heart what they were trying to tell me to do with the firearms. So I don't know, just like an interesting thing. But that it's interesting that you talk about those checkpoints. That takes me back to
Is
Iraq
that your
for sure.
scary moment too?
Yeah, no,
What's your
actually,
scariest moment?
ironically enough, it wasn't in the war zone. I was in another Middle Eastern country, and I was there like undercover and everything. But part of my mission there was to meet with a source that I had identified through my targeting efforts. So if you're just now tuning in, I was a targeting officer at the CIA, and one of a targeting officer's jobs is to pinpoint potential penetrations within a terrorist group. So as a targeting officer, I highlighted this lead to our officers in the field, and a case officer subsequently was like, this is a great lead, I want to meet with this guy. And so I flew out to support those initial meetings. But the thing with identifying a direct penetration of a terrorist network, is you're going to be meeting with a terrorist, right? So
100%.
so it's something at the CIA called a high threat meeting. And going into that meeting, you don't, and we were in a Middle Eastern country where it wasn't like Iraq and Afghanistan, where you're doing all the pat downs and stuff before you even come on base to meet with, officers. This was like in a hotel. We were doing this under the jurisdiction of a Middle Eastern intelligence service. So they were kind of responsible for making sure that the potential source didn't have any weapons on them. So there was a high level of trust that we had to have in this Arab intelligence service that they were doing their job and doing it correctly. And so initially, when the source came into the hotel lobby, I was sitting, my kind of position was I was sitting near the entrance to the hotel lobby. And I kind of had the first eyes on the potential source. And so I was communicating. This is way before, this is before iPhones. And I was communicating using this like, very antiquated phone
It's
nowadays.
like a
And
brick almost. I know
it was like a
exactly what
brick.
you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
I was like, and we're in the Middle East. So like
Yes.
we had gotten our phones from, Middle Eastern carrier. Yeah. And so I was letting them know that like the source was on his way up. But I was really scared sitting in that hotel lobby because I didn't know if he was going to come with a suicide vest
Oh
strapped on.
gosh.
You know, like
Wow.
I didn't
Yeah.
know. And because we wanted to make sure that we weren't doing it in a Western hotel that would, have the oh my gosh, the weapons checks. What do you call it? The metal detector. Sorry, brain fart. We weren't doing it in a hotel that had the metal detectors because
Wow.
we wanted to make sure we were consistent with this potential sources, um, cover story and background and everything. So we couldn't be like going to the Four Seasons and meeting with him. So anyway, when he came in, I knew he had not had a pat down. I knew he hadn't gone through the metal detector. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I really, and it would be kind of my fault because I highlighted this person to our officers in
It's
the
not your
field,
fault though. I mean,
you
the
know?
agency decided to take the meeting ultimately, right? That's
Yes.
not your fault.
Yes. But no, you felt the pressure, right?
Yes,
You
it's
felt
a
like the
lot of
pressure,
pressure.
a lot of pressure. And then obviously like you do all of the analysis you can before the meeting, laying out their access, but you really don't know until you get in that room with them what their access looks like and if it's really worth this meeting. Fortunately, this guy was awesome.
Oh,
And
that's great.
oh yeah, he was great. He
Wow.
helped us lay out like an entire HVT network. Like he was really, really great. But I remember also like sitting in the hotel room with him and I was the first Western woman he had ever seen like in person, other than, like he's used to like TV shows
Right,
and
of course.
movies and whatever. And I just saw like his eyes were just like it was like a deer in headlights. Like he was, but I used that to my advantage, right? And this is where, our prejudices, like, you're just a dumb blonde secretary,
I say
whatever.
work with it. That's what I
You
did.
just work with it. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, like clearly he wanted to kind of impress me. And there was, these two other, dudes in the room. Like one was the CIA case officer, friend of mine, and then the other was the Arab intelligence officer. And, they're smoking cigarettes, sitting there looking like all, badass and whatever. And I'm just like, okay, let's get to business. So I get out, my HVT lineup and we're going over access um and I'm really pushing things, right? Like I'm really pushing his access to make sure that it is
He's
what I
who he
think
says he is.
yeah, yeah, and who he
Yeah,
said of course and who he says he is. So yeah, we ended up like just like taking down like this whole network of guys, really bad
that's
guys.
amazing,
And yeah,
Brittany.
awesome. But it was really freaking scary
You're
initially.
putting all your trust in a terrorist.
Yeah.
That's what you're doing.
I'm trusting this
Yes.
terror and he like he would travel then to other places to help our case officers like make sure that we had the right lineup going on, like that we were doing. So I was also like I was kind of responsible to make sure that where he was going and what he said he was doing, he was actually doing, and which is a hard job from CIA headquarters in Langley,
Of course.
not in the field. So I was in the field for a certain amount of the time, and then obviously had to go back to headquarters. But yeah, that was my scariest moment. Another moment I had, which I feel like was really crazy, is when I was in Erbil, they put me up at what they used to call Saddam's vacation home, and I don't know why they call it Saddam Hussein's vacation home. But when I got on base for my assignment, before you get out, go on assignment, there are these cables that go out that basically seek station, whatever approval for a certain officer going out to the field for TDY, temporary duty assignment. And when I was headed out to this location, I thought, okay, they're going to have a place for me to stay on base. They're going to be ready to receive me. Well, when I got there, they're like, oh, no, no, no. You're staying in Saddam Hussein's vacation home, which was like a couple miles from the base. And so every day I had to walk like up and down from this house like by myself. And I remember I had like a little Kate Spade black leather purse that I put my Glock in. Like, okay, done for the day, gonna go back up to our little house. But it was like a creepy house. It was like, you kind of felt like you're in a horror story. I'm Catholic. I slept with my rosary beads every night because I thought, oh my gosh, like I had my Glock next to my rosary beads because I thought this is like a really creepy house. Like it just, I don't know. It was weird. It was weird. So I was scared too.
It's interesting too that you talk about like security. So when I was in Afghanistan, again, I think another preconceived notion is that like CIA had an actual station there.
Mm,
Immediately after 9/11, no one knew what the hell they were doing. So we definitely did not have a secure, none of this situation that we know
yeah,
of today
yeah.
existed. There wasn't even Camp Chapman, which we know, was that attack. None of that existed. So
Wow.
when we think about, I mean, yes, they tried to secure it the best that we could, but we were not even in a hotel. We were not on a military base. We were not even in a house. Like that's how, and when you think about who was securing it and
Hmm.
who had access to where I was living, it was all locals that we had vetted.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
super
Tracy, that's
scary.
so scary.
I
That
used
is,
to put a chair in front of my door at night.
yeah,
Obviously, I'm not Catholic, so I didn't have the rosary beads. But
yeah.
I mean, when you
That's,
think about that now,
yeah. It's insane. And like I remember in Baghdad, like hearing the rocket attack, like in our little trailer, like just and it was like I can't believe I like went to sleep. Now when I think about it, I'm like, I don't understand how I slept through that, like how I didn't. But to your point at the beginning of the podcast, it's just like when you're in your 20s, and then also like there is this thing about being at the CIA where you just feel like everybody else is doing it, so
yeah,
it's like not a big deal.
yeah,
Like,
no
oh,
one
I'm gonna
was
go
saying
to
anything.
Baghdad for the weekend. Like, I'm gonna go to Kabul for a few days. Like, it's not a big deal. And like I remember my husband, he like took me to the plane one night when I was going over, and he was like, "So where are you headed?" And I was like, "Well, I'm going to the Middle East, you know that." And he was like, I don't think you understand how crazy this is that you just like pop over to the Middle East for a couple days to like support something." And I'm like, "Yeah, probably not."
Yeah,
But
it's
yeah.
so interesting you say that because now, right, like, yeah, I popped over to the Middle East all the time. Like, that was just like my job. But now it's so funny. There's been a couple people who have approached me about going to Israel just because of my job that I
Yeah.
work with News Nation and covering national security and all of that. And it's a great deal. Like, everything's paid, all of that. But it's funny because my husband's like, no,
No.
like you're not, no, like
No.
we're not doing that. It's not safe. It's not. And I was like, wow, like things have definitely changed. And I have pause even about going. I want to go to Israel. It's like a dream place for me to go to. But it's interesting
Yeah.
how like things have changed
I
in terms of how we like look at the world, right?
Right. Right. No, absolutely. Things have changed. And like you have a background that I feel like it's really smart that you're being sensitive about the places that you go and the things you do. And I just look at things differently. I think I forget her name, but she's the owner of Petite Plume, which is like this amazing pajama wear that actually like the royal family wears.
Oh,
And it just sounds so crazy, but she was in the CIA. And
yes, that's right. She has a line. I think another officer has like a skincare
yeah.
line. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So she designs these luxury pajamas. My kids wear them. I love them. Petite Plume. But she was a CIA case officer, and she was in Afghanistan, and she talks about like just she has four boys. I have three boys. Just like how things shifted for her, like having kids and everything. And she was like, I guess they were on a plane in Africa somewhere, and it looked like the plane was going down, and she was like, it was a reality check for her. Like, okay, what am I doing? This is crazy. And oddly enough, the the two men that were in the room with me during that high threat meeting, I can say his name, Darren Labonte, and the GID case officer, they both died at Camp Chapman. And so it just really brought it all home for me and made me kind of realize, just the severity of the work and just like how dangerous it could be. But yeah. I feel like that was like really fun. I really learned a lot. Tracy, I'm so grateful that you shared that with us.
No, I'm
And
grateful
like,
you did too. It's amazing.
yeah, yeah. When I hear it out loud, it sounds cool. Like we're cool, right?
I mean, my kid doesn't think I'm cool, but
No,
like, I think you're cool. You think I'm cool. I
I
mean,
think you're cool.
hey,
Yeah, no, my kids think I'm negative cool, like the opposite
oh,
of cool.
100%.
They think I'm like the biggest nerd ever.
Yes.
So yeah, so please do join us next week. We're going to be talking about how we've transitioned. So both Tracy and I are mothers, and we're very involved in our kids' lives. And that transition was, different for both of us, transitioning from this like very highly classified work to kind of suburbia life and what that transition was like. And we'd love to hear your questions. So please, put a comment below this video and let us know what you'd like us to talk about specifically. We're happy to dive into whatever we can talk about. So thanks again for joining us on this episode of Spy Girls, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.